I took an $8,000 loan to fix my life, and it made everything worse. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of my bank. Engine off. Just sitting there, staring at my phone. In my hand was a loan approval notification. $8,000. Direct deposit within 2 business days. And I remember thinking, finally, I can breathe. I had been underwater for what felt like forever. Credit card debt. A medical bill I had been ignoring. Rent creeping up. A paycheck that never quite stretched far enough to cover the month. And this loan, this number, felt like the answer. Like a door I could finally walk through. I called my mom. I said, I figured it out. She asked what I meant. I said, I got a loan. $8,000. I'm going to pay everything off and start fresh. She got quiet for a second. And then she said, just be careful, baby. I told her I would. That was 3 years ago. What happened next took me longer to recover from than the debt I was trying to escape. Because the loan didn't fix my problems. It just gave my problems more money to work with. Let me show you how fast it fell apart. Before I even explain how I got there. It's about 14 months after I took that loan. I'm on the phone with a collections representative from a credit card company. Not a new card. One of the old ones I thought I had already dealt with. She is reading me a balance. $4,312, and my stomach dropped because I had already paid that card off. I am gripping the phone so hard my hand hurts. Because I had paid that card off with the loan money. I know I did. I have the transaction record. But I had also, in the months after, slowly started using it again. Small things at first. Groceries when I was short. A car repair that came up suddenly. An electric bill I couldn't cover. And then less small things. A birthday gift I felt I had to give. A weekend trip I couldn't afford to miss because everyone else was going. A new work bag because mine was falling apart and I had a presentation coming up. By the time 14 months had passed, I had a loan payment of $231 every single month. And I had rebuilt almost exactly the same amount of credit card debt that I had paid off with that loan. So I owed on the loan. And I owed on the cards again. I was in more debt than when I started. That should have been obvious to me before I signed the loan documents. It wasn't. And I want to spend some time on why, because I don't think I'm the only one who has made this mistake. Not by a long way. I need to take you back to who I was before any of this happened. I was 28. Working as an office manager for a small real estate firm. Steady job, decent enough people, salary of $47,000 a year before taxes. I had my own apartment. A 1-bedroom. Nothing fancy but mine. I had a used car that mostly worked. I had a cat named Biscuit. I had a life that looked stable from the outside. But inside the numbers, things were tight in a very specific way. I was not in a crisis. That's important to say. I wasn't missing meals. I wasn't behind on rent. I was in that particular financial zone that a lot of people in their late 20s know well, the zone where you are technically managing, but you are always one surprise away from not managing. One emergency. One medical bill. One car repair. One month where something unexpected happened, and suddenly the careful balancing act that kept everything standing would collapse. I had 3 credit cards. I had accumulated about $6,000 across them over about 4 years. Not reckless spending, or it didn't feel reckless at the time. It was the Christmas I charged because I wanted to give people good gifts. The trip to see my best friend when she moved across the country, and I didn't want to miss her housewarming. The dental work my insurance wouldn't fully cover. The laptop that died and needed replacing for work. Life things. Real things. But debt, all the same. I also had a medical bill from a procedure I'd had done 18 months earlier. It had been sitting in a drawer since they sent it. $2,300. Every time I thought about it, I closed the drawer again. That's the version of me who walked into the bank. Tired. Stretched. Looking for a way out of the low-grade financial anxiety that had become the background noise of my entire adult life. Scene 1, the month the card started. It started 4 years before the loan. I was 24. Just moved into my apartment. First real place that was entirely mine. I opened a credit card to help furnish it. The limit was $1,500. The interest rate was 22%, I know that now. I didn't really register it then. I just saw $1,500 I could use now and pay back later. I bought a couch, a bed frame, a few things that made the apartment feel like home instead of a storage unit. And here's the thing, I had a plan. I was going to pay it off over the next 4 months. $200 or $300 a month. It would be done by spring. What actually happened? February came, and I had an unexpected car repair. March came, and I needed to fly home because my grandmother was ill. April came, and I had paid the minimum twice because I was stretched, and suddenly the balance hadn't moved the way I expected, and there was a new charge on there from a grocery run I'd forgotten about. That's when I noticed the minimum payment trap for the first time. But I noticed it the way you notice a slow leak in a tire, aware of it, telling yourself you'll deal with it soon, continuing to drive. I never quite paid that card off. 2 years later, I had 2 more. Scene 2, the job that paid less than I needed. This scene isn't dramatic. It's just quiet and real. I was 26. I had just taken the office manager position. I was genuinely proud. It was a step up from administrative assistant, more responsibility, my own small domain. The salary was $47,000. In the city where I lived, that was not a comfortable income. After taxes, I was taking home about $3,100 a month. My rent was $1,200. My car note was $290. Insurance, utilities, phone, groceries, another $800 or so. That left me somewhere around $600 for everything else. Every doctor's copay, every car repair, every birthday, every clothing item I needed for a professional job, every parking ticket. Everything that life produces that doesn't appear on a budget template. $600 sounds like room. Until you actually try to live a month inside it. I got through months by using the cards for small overages and telling myself I'd pay them back before the interest hit. Sometimes I did. More often, I paid part and carried the rest. Month by month, the balance climbed. Not fast. Just steadily. The way water rises in a basement, slowly enough that you keep thinking you have time. By the time I was 28, the balances across 3 cards totaled $6,140. And I was paying minimum payments on all 3, which meant I was mostly just paying interest and barely touching the principal. That math, if you've never sat down with it, is brutal. Minimum payments on $6,000 in credit card debt at average rates can keep you paying for 12, 15, even 18 years if you don't interrupt the pattern. I didn't know that then. Or maybe I knew it and didn't want to look at it directly. Scene 3, the medical bill in the drawer. The medical bill deserves its own moment because of what it represents psychologically. I had a minor procedure done when I was 27. My insurance covered most of it. But there was a remaining balance. $2,311. When the bill arrived, I opened it, looked at the number, felt a wave of something I can only describe as paralysis, and put it in a kitchen drawer under some takeout menus. I know that sounds irrational. It is irrational. But financial avoidance, the act of not opening the bill, not looking at the account balance, not checking the statements, is incredibly common. Psychologists have studied it. It's a stress response. When something feels too overwhelming to solve, the brain sometimes treats not looking at it as a form of relief. The problem is that the bill doesn't care whether you're looking at it. It just keeps growing. Late fees. Interest on the medical debt. Eventually a note that it had been sent to collections. By the time I finally opened the drawer and confronted it, 17 months after it arrived, the balance had grown to $2,700 and some change. And now there was a collections record attached to my name, which was doing quiet damage to my credit score that I wouldn't fully understand until I tried to do things that required good credit. 3 separate stories. One loan trying to solve all of them. This is the part one didn't understand at the time. Not as an excuse. just as an honest account of what was happening in my head. There's a concept called the fresh start effect. Researchers who study financial behavior have identified that people are significantly more motivated to change their habits at natural reset points, and this is where I made the biggest mistake. The new year, a birthday, a Monday morning. There's something about a clean beginning that feels like it makes the past irrelevant. A loan felt like a fresh start. And that's not irrational, exactly. Debt consolidation, using one loan to pay off multiple high-interest balances, is a real and sometimes useful financial strategy. It can lower your overall interest rate, simplify your payments, and give you a clearer path. But it only works if two things are true. First, the loan rate has to actually be lower than the debt you're paying off. And second, and this is the part nobody emphasizes enough, you have to change the behavior that created the debt in the first place. I met the first condition. My loan came at a fixed rate of just over 11%. My credit cards were ranging from 19 to 24%. So mathematically, yes, consolidating made sense. But I hadn't done anything about the second condition. At all. Because here's the honest truth. The loan didn't just feel like a financial solution. It felt like emotional relief. That is the distinction that changes everything. For months, years, I had been carrying a quiet, constant dread. The kind that lives in your chest when you know the numbers aren't working, but you can't quite face them. Every time my phone buzzed with a bank notification, there was a split second of anxiety before I checked it. Every time a bill arrived in the mail, there was that moment of hesitation before I opened it. The loan made that feeling go away. Temporarily. Completely. The day after the money hit my account and I started paying things off, I felt lighter than I had in years. And that lightness became the problem. Because I associated the loan with the relief, not with the debt. In my nervous system, taking the loan was connected to the feeling of freedom. So when the freedom started to slip, when the card started to creep back up and the anxiety returned, my brain remembered what had worked last time. And it started to wonder if another loan might work again. That's the cycle that traps people. Not stupidity. Not laziness. A completely understandable emotional logic that happens to be financially catastrophic. There was something else happening too. Something I'm slightly embarrassed to name, but I think is important. I had never really learned how to manage money in any structured way. Not from school. Personal finance was not taught where I grew up. Not from home. My parents managed money intuitively, doing the best they could with what they had, but there were no explicit conversations about budgets or interest rates or how credit cards actually work. I was 20 years old and I genuinely did not understand, at a bone-deep level, what it meant that my credit cards were charging 22% interest. I knew it was high. I didn't understand what it cost me in real dollars every single month I carried a balance. Ignorance isn't the same as stupidity, but it has the same financial consequences. And nobody had ever sat me down and made it concrete. Here's what it actually cost me. Because I think seeing them clearly is part of the lesson. Before the loan, my debt picture looked like this. Credit card 1, $2,200 at 19%. Credit card 2, $2,400 at 22%. Credit card 3, $1,500 at 24%. Medical bill and collections, $2,700. Total debt, approximately $8,800. The loan I took was $8,000 at 11.4% interest, repaid over 4 years. Monthly payment, $231. I used $6,000 of it to pay off the 3 credit cards entirely. I used $2,000 to settle the medical collections account. I called and negotiated them down, which was one smart thing I did. The remaining balance I put in checking. For about 3 weeks, I had 0 credit card debt and a loan I felt was manageable. That feeling lasted exactly as long as it took for life to happen again. Month 1, I used card 1 for groceries twice because I was low on cash in the 3rd week of the month. Total recharged, $80. Month 2, my car needed new tires. I didn't have $800 sitting in savings. I had never built a savings buffer, so I put it on card too. $800. Month 3. I went to a conference for work. My company reimbursed the hotel, but not immediately. I put it on card 1. $512. The reimbursement came 6 weeks later. By then, the interest had already started. You see the pattern forming. Not reckless spending. Real life. But real life that I had no buffer to absorb. No savings account with 3 months of expenses sitting quietly in reserve. No emergency fund. No financial cushion of any kind. Just a loan payment, 3 clear credit cards, and the absolute certainty that something would come up. 14 months after the loan, here is where I stood. Loan balance remaining, roughly $6,200. Monthly payment continuing, $231. Credit card debt, rebuilt, $4,300 across 3 cards. Total debt, $10,500, which was $2,000 more than when I started after paying for over a year. I had paid 14 monthly loan installments, $3,234 of actual money, and I was deeper in debt than the day I walked into the bank. When I finally sat down and made myself look at those numbers with a full accounting, I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time without moving. There was also a cost I hadn't counted. The loan inquiry and the new loan account had impacted my credit score. Not catastrophically, but enough that when I looked into refinancing a few months later, I couldn't get as favorable a rate as I'd had before. And there was the opportunity cost. If I had put those $231 a month into even a basic savings account for 4 years instead of into loan repayment, I would have had over $11,000. Not invested, not growing aggressively, just saved. A foundation. A buffer. A completely different relationship with financial emergencies. I didn't have that. I had a smaller version of the same problem, plus a loan payment. Looking back, the warning signs were obvious. Multiple times. I just didn't know how to read them. The first one was that I had no emergency fund and I wasn't creating one. When I took the loan and paid off the cards, I had roughly $300 left over. I put it in my checking account. I told myself I'd start building savings once things settled down. They didn't settle down, of course. They never do. That $300 disappeared into ordinary monthly life within 2 weeks. Anyone who had looked at my plan from the outside would have seen it immediately. You are paying off debt without addressing the structural reason you went into debt, which is that you have no savings buffer. The moment an expense appears that you can't absorb in cash, you will use the cards again. The plan is already broken before it begins. I couldn't see it. I was too focused on the relief of the lower balances to look forward. The second warning sign was how I felt about the credit cards once they were cleared. I didn't cut them up. I didn't close them. I told myself I was keeping them for emergencies. And that was partly true. But there was also something about having 0 balances on 3 cards that felt like financial room I was allowed to use. Like the loan had created space, and that space was available. It wasn't available, but it felt like it was. And feelings drive financial behavior far more than logic does. The third warning sign was that nobody around me was asking the right questions. When I told people I was taking a loan to consolidate my debt, the response was generally positive. Oh, that's smart. Good for you for dealing with it. That's exactly what those loans are for. Nobody asked, what is your plan to make sure you don't rebuild the credit card balances? Nobody asked, do you have an emergency fund? Nobody asked, have you changed the spending patterns or addressed the income gap that created this in the first place? Those are the questions that would have mattered. They didn't get asked. And I wasn't self-aware enough at that point to ask them of myself. The fourth warning sign came from the loan officer, of all places. As I was signing the paperwork, she said something like, you'll want to be disciplined about not running those cards back up. She said it casually. I said, of course. We moved on. I think about that sentence sometimes. She knew. On some level, she had seen this pattern enough times that she flagged it in one sentence. But the way it was said, as a soft reminder rather than a genuine warning, made it easy to absorb without really hearing. The warnings were there. In the math. In my own behavior. In a single sentence from the woman who handed me the money. But I ignored them because I desperately wanted the story I was telling myself to be true. And I think that's the most human thing I can say about it. I just didn't want to see them. The turning point was quiet, but it changed everything. It never is really. It was a Sunday afternoon in October. I was doing laundry and I got an email from my bank, a statement notification for the credit card I thought I had under control. I almost didn't open it. That was my first instinct, just close the notification and keep folding clothes. And for once, I didn't look away. I think I was just tired. Not tired in the dramatic sense. Tired in the way you get when you have been carrying something heavy for a very long time and your arms just don't have the strength to keep pretending it's fine. I opened the email. I looked at the balance. $1,942. On one card. And then I did something I had never done before. I opened every other account right after it. All 3 cards. The loan. Checking. Savings, what there was of it, which was $318. I wrote the numbers down on a piece of paper. By hand. The way seeing something physically is different from seeing it on a screen. And I sat and I looked at what I had actually created. $10,500 in debt. $318 in savings. A loan payment that had 2.5 years left on it. 3 credit cards I was actively using again. And I thought, very quietly, for the first time without any defensiveness, the loan made things worse. Not because it was a bad product. Not because the interest rate was unfair. But because I used it as a solution to a problem it was never designed to solve. A loan can restructure debt. It cannot fix the habits that create debt. I had treated the symptom and left the cause completely untouched. And sitting there with that piece of paper, I realized I had been doing that my entire financial adult life. Treating symptoms. Avoiding causes. Looking for the thing that would make the anxiety go away without asking why the anxiety kept coming back. That Sunday afternoon was the first time I genuinely asked why. About 2 weeks after that Sunday, I did something I had never done before. I told someone the full truth. Not the edited version. Not, I have some debt I'm working through. The real number. The real picture. The full weight of it. I told my sister. She's 4 years older than me. She had been through her own money struggles in her late 20s and had come out the other side of them. I had always been slightly envious of how together she seemed with money. I had assumed it was a personality thing, that some people are just wired for financial discipline, and I wasn't one of them. I told her everything. The cards. The medical bill in the drawer. The loan. The way the balances had rebuilt. The $10,000 number on the paper. She didn't react the way I feared she would. She didn't look horrified or disapproving. She just listened. And when I finished, she said, "Okay. Do you have a budget?" I said, "Kind of. I track things in my head." She looked at me and said, simply, "That's the problem." That sentence hit harder than the debt. Those 4 words landed harder than anything else in that conversation. Because she wasn't saying I was bad with money. She was saying I was trying to manage something complex with an unreliable tool. Running the numbers in my head meant I was always approximating. Always rounding. Always letting myself believe things were slightly better than they were because the discomfort of knowing exactly made me want to look away. A written budget makes things real. A number in your head stays flexible. Stays negotiable. Stays deniable. She sat with me for 2 hours that afternoon. We wrote everything down. Income. Every fixed expense. Every variable expense with a real average based on my actual spending, not what I wished I was spending. We looked at what I actually had left after obligations. The number at the bottom of that page, the real, actual amount I had available each month after everything necessary, was $240. $240 per month. For emergencies, savings, any unexpected expense, any social obligation, any clothing, any medical copay. I stared at that number for a long time. And I understood, maybe for the first time with real clarity, why I had been running out of money every month. Not because I was irresponsible, not because I was spending recklessly, but because the gap between what I earned and what life cost was genuinely narrow. And I had been filling that gap with credit cards without ever naming it as a structural problem that needed a structural solution. The loan hadn't solved anything. Because you can't borrow your way out of a gap between income and expenses. You can only close the gap. In the weeks after that conversation with my sister, I kept coming back to one question. Why did I think the loan would fix it? Not the financial logic. I understood the financial logic now, even if I didn't before. I mean the emotional logic. The part of me that looked at $8,000 as a solution to a problem that $8,000 was never designed to solve. And what I came to understand was this. I had never been taught to sit with financial discomfort. Every time the anxiety of debt got loud enough, I looked for something to make it quiet. The first thing I tried was avoidance. The bills in the drawer, the accounts I didn't check. When that stopped working, because the consequences became too real, I looked for an action. Something I could do. Something that would produce the feeling of having handled it. The loan was the most convincing version of that feeling I had ever found. It felt like action. It felt like responsibility. It felt like I was finally being an adult about my money. But it wasn't a real solution. It was a very expensive version of the same avoidance. Instead of putting the bill in a drawer, I had packaged up all the bad feelings into one monthly payment and told myself the problem was solved. The debt was restructured. The problem was untouched. There's a version of this that happens over and over in people's financial lives. It might look like a loan. It might look like a balance transfer to a zero-interest card. It might look like borrowing from a family member or dipping into a retirement account. The forms are different. The emotional logic underneath is the same. We look for the thing that will produce the feeling of resolution. And we mistake that feeling for actual progress. Real financial progress is quieter and slower and less satisfying in the short term than a loan approval notification. It looks like a budget that you actually follow. Like a savings account that you actually don't touch. Like saying no to the expense that would feel good now but costs you next month. Those things don't produce a feeling of relief in the moment. They produce a feeling of discipline, which is much less emotionally satisfying until you look at the number a year later and it has changed. That was the realization that finally stuck. Not that I had made a mistake. Not that I was bad with money. But that I had been managing my feelings about money instead of managing the money itself. And that was costing me thousands. Those are different things. And they require different tools. This is what actually changed everything. Not a checklist. Just the honest, unglamorous truth of how I slowly started to change things. The first thing, I wrote a real budget. Not in my head. On paper, and then in a simple spreadsheet. Every income source, every fixed expense, every variable expense with a real ceiling I had decided in advance, not what I hoped I'd spend, but what I was actually going to allow. This alone changed my relationship with money in a way I didn't expect. Because when a decision is written down, you can see the cost of changing it. When it's in your head, you can always negotiate with yourself in the moment. A budget isn't a punishment. It's information. It's the truth about what's actually possible, without any softening. The second thing, I stopped treating the credit cards as backup income. This was the behavioral change the loan couldn't make for me. I had to make it myself. I didn't cut the cards, I kept one for genuine emergencies, with a real definition of what qualified as an emergency. But I stopped using them as a supplement to a budget that didn't quite work. The way I made this possible was the third thing. The third thing, I built an emergency fund before I aggressively paid off debt. This goes against what a lot of financial advice says, pay off the highest interest debt first, that's where the math points. And the math isn't wrong. But the psychology matters too. The reason I had rebuilt my credit card debt after the loan was that I had no buffer. The moment a real expense appeared, the card came back out. So before I started making extra payments on the loan, I built a $1,000 emergency fund. Just 1,000. It took me 4 months. But once it existed, something changed. When the car needed work, I used the emergency fund and didn't touch the cards. When I had a medical bill, same thing. The fund absorbed the shocks that had always sent me back to the debt cycle. After the emergency fund, I started making extra payments on my highest interest credit card while paying minimums on the others. Then I moved to the next one. Then the loan. This is sometimes called the avalanche method, highest interest first. It's mathematically efficient. But what made it work for me wasn't the method. It was the foundation underneath, the budget, the behavioral change, the emergency fund that kept me from undoing the progress. The fourth thing, I had an honest conversation with myself about income. The $240 of breathing room I had each month was not enough. That was the root of so much of the stress, the debt, the financial fragility. I couldn't solve that immediately, but I could name it. I could stop pretending the problem was purely behavioral, that if I just had more discipline, the math would work. The math didn't have enough room. So over the following 18 months, I started building additional income. Slowly. A freelance project here. Picking up hours where I could. Not because I subscribed to hustle culture, I don't, but because I had finally been honest enough to see that the structural gap needed a structural answer. That took time. It didn't happen quickly, but it happened. And it changed the shape of everything. The loan was not the villain of this story. The loan was a tool I used incorrectly because I hadn't understood the real problem. The real problem was that I was managing feelings instead of finances. And no loan, no financial product of any kind can solve that for you. Only you can solve that. With honesty, with time, and with the willingness to look at the numbers even when they're painful. I paid off the last credit card 2 years and 4 months after that Sunday in October with a piece of paper. The loan has about 8 months left on it. By the time it's done, I'll have paid roughly $11,100 total, principal plus interest, to borrow $8,000. That interest, about $3,000, is the real cost of everything I described in this video. The real financial cost of not understanding the difference between fixing the feeling and fixing the problem. I think about that number sometimes. Not to punish myself. Just to remember. Because it keeps me honest. It keeps me building the emergency fund instead of dipping into it for things that aren't emergencies. It keeps me looking at the budget before I make a decision rather than after. It keeps me in the habit of seeing the numbers clearly, all of them, at the same time, with nothing in a drawer. If you're in the middle of something that looks like my story, if you're holding a loan approval and thinking finally, I'm not telling you the loan is wrong. Sometimes debt consolidation is the right move. Sometimes you need the lower interest rate and the simplified payment. But before you sign anything, I want you to ask yourself one question. Not, can I afford the monthly payment? That's not the question that matters. The question is, what created the debt I'm about to pay off? And have I changed that thing? If the answer is yes, if you have a budget, a savings buffer, a real understanding of what went wrong, then a loan might be a genuinely useful tool. If the answer is no, if you're hoping the loan is the change, rather than a tool you'll use while you make the change, then you might be about to buy yourself 12 months of relief and a longer version of the same problem. I know, because I did it. And I came out the other side. But it was longer and harder and more expensive than it needed to be. You deserve better than that. You deserve the version where you actually understand what happened and why, so it can stop happening. The numbers can change. They really can. Not quickly. Not painlessly. But steadily and honestly and in a direction that finally feels like forward. Start with the truth of where you are. Everything else can grow from there. Alone can clear your debt. But it can't fix the life that created it. And if you don't fix that, you'll end up right back where you started.